U.S. President Barack Obama has admitted the rise of Islamic State was triggered by the U.S. invasion of Iraq. To talk more about this, I'm joined by political analyst Caleb Maupin, live via Skype. Thank you for joining us again on RT International. So President Obama, for the first time, admitting that there are negative consequences from the war in Iraq. How significant is that?
Well, it is certainly significant to hear it from the President of the United States. And it is an absolute fact that Saddam Hussein may have done many bad things, but while Saddam Hussein was running Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. You know, this was an Arab nationalist government, and it was an enemy of Al-Qaeda and the forces of extremism in the region, of religious extremism. However, Obama did kind of gloss over and missed his own role in the creation of ISIL, and his own role involves the U.S. funding of the armed opposition in Syria, which ISIL directly came out of. The money flowing from the U.S.-aligned Gulf states, as well as directly from the U.S. and from Britain, has been funding and arming the terrorist insurgents that are seeking to overthrow the Syrian government and using very, very violent means to do so. And a big section of the Free Syrian Army, which is an organization that receives loads of weapons and funding from the West as well as from the U.S.-aligned Gulf states, a big section of the Free Syrian Army actually joined ISIS and laid the basis for ISIS. So Obama didn't talk about the effects of U.S. policy in Syria in creating ISIL. He did, however, highlight the problematic policies in Iraq that also contributed to it. So
why do you think he waited till now to make this statement?
Well, it's very easy to blame the person who left office before you. The invasion of Iraq is something that U.S. President George W. Bush was absolutely hated for internationally, and it's very safe at this point to denounce it and say it was a mistake for the U.S. to invade Iraq. However, you know, current U.S. policies are harder to denounce, and you know, Obama made this statement at this point, and you know, he's not the first person to have made this statement. I mean, many intellectuals have come forward and said that the U.S. policy of overthrowing independent-minded governments in the Middle East has resulted in the creation and the rise of extremist groups like ISIL. You know, this is commonly understood. However, what's not understood is that the U.S. is continuing this policy. The U.S. continues to fund groups like the Mujahideen Cult, which is a terrorist organization seeking to overthrow the Iranian government. The U.S. is also continuing to fund the armed terrorist insurgents that are tearing apart Syria, another secular Arab nationalist state. You know, this is the result of U.S. policy. The U.S. doesn't go into the Middle East and overthrow governments with the intention of creating stability. It goes in to overthrow governments that are getting in their way and that are their competitors on the world markets. If you look at all the enemies of the U.S. around the world, not just in the Middle East, they all have state-owned oil companies. You know, that they don't want any competitors in the world markets. They want the Wall Street and London oil monopolists to rule the world and not face any competition on global markets.
Do you think they'll see any change in policy from this?
Absolutely not. You know, just the fact that, you know, it's very safe. It's always very safe to denounce crimes that were committed 10 years ago. But if you're committing crimes at that very moment and you're not willing to acknowledge that, I don't think any change is going to happen. What the U.S. is doing in Syria right now is a crime. There are millions of refugees. There are people dying as the U.S. continues to pour money and weapons into the armed terrorist insurgent groups. If we're going to see any stop in terrorism in that region, the U.S. and the West, as well as their puppets in the Gulf states, must stop funding the armed terrorist groups in Syria.
All right, Caleb Maupin, thanks for your time.